We have 26 minutes to get a 30-minute chapter done. Let's do this as quickly as we can. Gotta wait for the air conditioner to finish turning off. Today we'll be continuing Jo's Boys by Louisa May Alcott. Chapter 3, Jo's Last Scrape. The March family had enjoyed a great many surprises in the course of their varied career. But the greatest of all was when the ugly duckling turned out to be not a swan, but a golden goose whose literary eggs found such an unexpected market that in 10 years Jo's wildest and most cherished dream actually came true. How or why it happened she never clearly understood, but all of a sudden she found herself famous in a small way. And better still, with a snug little fortune in her pocket to clear away the obstacles of the present and assure the future of her boys. Excuse me. It began during a bad year when everything went wrong at Plumfield. Times were hard. The school dwindled, Jo overworked herself and had a long illness. Laurie and Amy were abroad, and the Bears too proud to ask help, even of those as near and dear as this generous pair. Confined to her room, Jo got desperate over the state of affairs, till she fell back upon the long-disused pen as the only thing she could do to help fill up the gaps in the income. A book for girls being wanted by a certain publisher, she hastily scribbled a little story describing a few scenes and adventures in the lives of herself and her sisters, though boys were more in her line, and with very slight hopes of success, sent it out to seek its fortune. Things always went by contraries with Jo. Her first book, labored over for years and launched full of the high hopes and ambitious dreams of youth, foundered on its voyage, though the wreck continued to float long afterward, to the profit of the publisher at least. The hastily written story, sent away with no thought beyond the few dollars it might bring, sailed with a fair wind and a wise pilot at the helm into public favor, and came home heavily laden with an unexpected cargo of gold and glory. A more astonished woman probably never existed than Josephine Baer, when her little ship came into port with flags flying, cannon that had been silent before now booming gaily, and better than all, many kind faces rejoicing with her, many friendly hands grasping hers with cordial congratulations. After that it was plain sailing, and she merely had to load her ships and send them off on prosperous trips, to bring home stores of comfort for all she loved and labored for. The fame she never did quite accept, for it takes very little fire to make a great deal of smoke nowadays, and notoriety is not real glory. The fortune she could not doubt, and gratefully received, though it was not half so large a one as generous Though it was not half so large a one as a generous world reported it to be. The tide having turned continued to rise, and floated the family comfortably into a snug harbor where the older members could rest secure from storms, and whence the younger ones could launch their boats for the voyage of life. All manner of happiness, peace, and plenty came in those years to bless the patient waiters, hopeful workers, and devout believers in the wisdom and justice of him who sends disappointment, poverty, and sorrow to try the love of human hearts, and make success the sweeter when it comes. The world saw the prosperity, and kind souls rejoiced over the improved fortunes of the family, but the success Jo valued most, the happiness that nothing could change or take away, few knew much about. It was the power of making her mother's last years happy and serene, to see the burden of care laid down forever, the weary hands at rest, the dear face untroubled by any anxiety, and the tender heart free to pour itself out in the wise charity which was its delight. As a girl, Jo's favorite plan had been a room where Marmee could sit in peace and enjoy herself after her hard, heroic life. Now the dream had become a happy fact, and Marmee sat in her pleasant chamber with every comfort and luxury about her, loving daughters to wait on her as infirmities increased, a faithful mate to lean upon, and grandchildren to brighten the twilight of life with their dutiful affection. A very precious time to all, for she rejoiced as only mothers can in the good fortunes of their children. She had lived to reap the harvest she sowed, had seen prayers answered, hopes blossom, good gifts bear fruit, peace and prosperity bless the home she had made, and then, like some brave, patient angel, whose work was done, turned her face heavenward, glad to rest. This was the sweet and sacred sight of the change, but it had its droll and thorny one, as all things have in this curious world of ours. After the first surprise, incredulity, and joy which came to Jo, with the ow, with the ingratitude of human nature, she soon tired of renown and began to resent her loss of liberty. For suddenly the admiring public took possession of her and all her affairs, past, present, and to come. Strangers demanded to look at her, question. Strangers demanded to look at her, question, advise, warn, congratulate, and drive her out of her wits by well-meant but very wearisome. Attentions. If she declined to open her heart to them, they reproached her. If she refused to endow her pet charities, relieve private wants, or sympathize with every ill and trial known to humanity, she was called hard-hearted, selfish, and haughty. If she found it impossible to answer the piles of letters sent her, she was neglectful of her duty to the admiring public. And if she preferred the privacy of home to the pedestal upon which she was requested to pose, the airs of literary people were freely criticized. She did her best for the children, they being the public for whom she wrote, and labored stoutly to supply the demand always in the mouths of voracious youth. More stories, more right away. Her family objected to this devotion at their expense, and her health suffered, but for a time she gratefully offered herself up on the altar of juvenile literature, feeling that she owed a good deal to the little friends in whose sight she had found favor after 20 years of effort. But a time came when her patience gave out, and wearying of being a lion, she became a bear in nature as in name, and returned to her den, growled awfully when ordered out. Her family enjoyed the fun, and had small sympathy with her trials, but Jo came to consider it the worst scrape of her life, for liberty had always been her dearest possession, and it seemed to be fast going from her. Living in a lantern soon loses its charm, and she was too old, too tired, and too busy to like it. She felt that she had done all that could reasonably be required of her when autographs, photographs, and autobiographical sketches had been sown broadcast over the land. Airplane. 18 minutes to go till work. Very rarely do I get a call like first thing, so it's usually okay to go a teeny tiny bit over. I generally try not to though, but like I'm getting behind, so. Broadcast over the land. When artists had taken her home in all its aspects, and reporters had taken her, When artists had taken her home in all its aspects, and reporters had taken her in the grim one she always assumed on these trying occasions. When a series of enthusiastic boarding schools had ravaged her grounds for trophies, and a steady stream of amiable pilgrims had worn her doorsteps with their respectful feet. When servants left after a week's trial of the bell that rang all day. When her husband was forced to guard her at meals and the boys to cover her retreat out of back windows on certain occasions. When enterprising guests walked in unannounced at unfortunate moments. A sketch of one day may perhaps explain the state of things, offer some excuse for the unhappy woman, and give a hint to the autograph fiend now rampant in the land, for it is a true tale. There ought to be a law to protect unfortunate authors, said Mrs. Jo one morning, soon after Emile's arrival, when the mail brought her an unusually large and varied assortment of letters. To me, it is a more vital subject than international copyright, for time is money, peace is health, and I lose both with no return but less respect for my fellow creatures, and a wild desire to fly into the wilderness since I cannot shut my doors even in free America. Lion hunters are awful when in search of their prey. If they could change places for a while, It would do them good, and they'd see what bores they were when they do themselves the honor of calling to express their admiration of our charming work," quoted Ted, with a bow to his parent, not frowning over 12 requests for autographs. "I've made up my mind on one point," said Mrs. Joe with great firmness. "I will not answer this kind of letter. I've sent at least 6 to this boy, and he probably sells them. This girl writes from a seminary, and if I send her one, all the other girls will at once write for more. I'll begin by saying they know they intrude, and that I am of course annoyed by these requests. But they venture to ask because I like boys, or they like the books, or it is only one." That's definitely an airplane. Emerson and Whittier put these things in the waste paper basket, and though only a literary nursery maid who provides moral pap for the young, I will follow their illustrious example, for I shall have no time to eat or sleep if I try to satisfy these dear unreasonable children. And Mrs. Joe swept away the entire batch with a sigh of relief. Rob. That kind of stuff has not happened to me. I keep getting... Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. I keep getting sales things. Since I started the podcast, pretty much, I keep getting sales stuff, but now with authoring stuff, I keep getting more and more and more. Oh. Another airplane. Yeah, I don't know. My eye is not super pink, so I don't think it's pink eye. I think I probably just scratched it or something. It doesn't hurt at all, though. It was just like yesterday during the day. "I'll open the others and let you eat your breakfast in peace, lieb mother," said Rob, who often acted as her secretary. "Here's one from the south." And breaking an imposing seal, he read. I'll save older Rob's voice. Rob. Older Rob. Doop, doop, doop. "Excuse me," he read. "Madame, as it has pleased heaven to bless your efforts with a large fortune, I feel no hesitation in asking you to supply funds to purchase a new communion service for our church. To whatever denomination you belong, you will of course respond with liberality to such a request. Respectfully yours, Mrs. X.Y. Xavier. Send a civil refusal, dear. All I have to give must go to feed and clothe the poor at my gates. That is my thank offering for success." "Go on," answered his mother with a grateful glance about her happy home. "A literary youth of 18 proposes that you put your name to a novel he has written, and after the first edition your name is to be taken off and his put on. There's a cool proposal for you. I guess you won't agree to that, in spite of your soft-heartedness towards most of the young scribblers. Couldn't be done. Tell him so kindly, and don't let him send the manuscript. I have 7 on hand now, and barely time to read my own," said Mrs. Joe, pensively fishing a small letter out of the slop bowl and opening it with care, because the downhill address suggested that a child wrote it. "I will answer this myself. A little sick girl wants a book, and she shall have it. But I can't write sequels to all the rest to please her. I should never come to an end if I tried to suit these voracious little Oliver Twists, clamoring for more. What's next, Robin? This is short and sweet. Dear Mrs. Bear, I'm now going to give you my opinion of your works. I've read them all many times and call them first-rate. Please go ahead. Your admirer, Billy Babcock. Now that is what I like. Billy is a man of sense and a critic worth having, since he has read my works many times before expressing his opinion. He asks for no answer, so send my thanks and regards. Here's a lady in England with 7 girls, and she wishes to know your views upon education. Also what careers they shall follow, the oldest being 12. Don't wonder she's worried," laughed Rob. I'll sneeze. "I'll try to answer it, but as I have no girls, my opinion isn't worth much and will probably shock her, as I shall tell her to let them run and play and build up good, stout bodies before she talks about careers. They will soon show what they want if they are let alone, and not all run in the same mold. Here's a fellow who wants to know what sort of a girl he shall marry, and if you know of any like those in your stories. Give him Nan's address, and see what he'll get, proposed Ted, privately resolving to do it himself if possible. This is from a lady who wants you to adopt her child and lend her money to This is from a lady who wants you to adopt her child and lend her money to study art abroad for a few years. Better take it and try your hand at a girl, mother. No, thank you. I will keep to my own line of business. What is that blotted one? It looks rather awful to judge by the ink, asked Mrs. Joe, who beguiled her daily task by trying to guess from the outside what was inside her many letters. This proved to be a poem from an insane admirer, to judge by its incoherent style. To J.M.B. Oh, were I a heliotrope, I would play poet, and blow a breeze of fragrance to you, and none should know it. Your form like the stately elm, when Phoebus, I feel like that's still pulled up. Phoebus. Your form like the stately elm, when Phoebus gilds the morning ray. Your cheeks like the ocean bed that blooms a rose in May. Your words are wise and bright, I bequeath them to you a legacy given. And when your spirit takes its flight, may it bloom a flower in heaven. My tongue in flattering language spoke, and sweeter silence never broke. In busiest street or loneliest glen, I take you with the flashes of my pen. Consider the lilies, how they grow, they toil not yet or fair. Gems and flowers in Solomon's seal, the geranium of the world is J.M. Bear. James. Well, the boys shouted over this effusion, which is a true one. God, I'm getting tired of these sneezes. Their mother read several liberal offers from budding magazines for her to edit them gratis. One long letter from a young girl, inconsolable because her favorite hero died. And would Mrs. Bear rewrite the tale and make it end good? Another from an irate boy denied an autograph, who darkly foretold financial ruin and loss of favor if she did not send him and all other fellows who asked autographs, photographs, and autobiographical sketches. A minister who wished to know her religion, and an undecided maiden asked which of her two lovers she should marry. These samples will suffice to show a few of the claims made on a busy woman's time, and make my readers pardon Mrs. Joe if she did not carefully reply to all. That job is done. Now I will dust a bit and then go to my work. I'm all behindhand and cereals can't wait, so deny me to everybody, Mary. I won't see Queen Victoria if she comes today. And Mrs. Bear threw down her napkin as if defying all creation. I need to blow my nose real quick. So sorry. End of a freaking cold. Oh, I hate being sick so much. Husband, okay, I'm like, who is talking here? I hope the day will go well with thee, my dearest, answered her husband, who had been busy with his own voluminous correspondence. I will dine at college with Professor Plock, who is to visit with us. Damn it. My ears are clogged. I will dine at college with Professor Plock, who is to visit us today. The younglings can lunch on Parnassus, so thou shalt have a quiet time. What the heck is up with all these repeated names? It's like the author was reading mythology right before writing this and just like, let's throw in all the names. And smoothing the worried lines out of her forehead with his goodbye kiss, the excellent man marched away, both pockets full of books, an old umbrella in one hand and a bag of stones for the geology class in the other. If all literary women had such thoughtful angels for husbands, they would live longer and write more. Perhaps that wouldn't be a blessing to the world, though, as most of us write too much now, said Mrs. Joe, waving her feather duster to her spouse, who responded with flourishes of the umbrella as he went down the avenue. Rob started for school at the same time. looking so much like him with his books and bag and square shoulders, and steady air that his mother laughed as she turned away, saying heartily, "Bless both my dear professors, for better creatures never lived." Emile was already gone to his ship in the city, but Ted lingered to steal the address he wanted, ravage the sugar bowl, and talk with Mum, for the two had great larks together. Mrs. Joe always arranged her own parlor, refilled her vases, and gave the little touches that left it cool and neat for the day. Going to draw down the curtain, she beheld an artist sketching on the lawn, and groaned as she hastily retired to the back window to shake her duster. At that moment the bell rang, and the sound of wheels was heard in the road. "I'll go. Mary lets him in." And Ted smoothed his hair as he made for the hall. "Can't see anyone. Give me a chance to fly upstairs," whispered Mrs. Joe, preparing to escape. But before she could do so, a man appeared at the door with a card in his hand. Ted met him with a stern air, and his mother dodged behind the window curtains to bide her time for escape. "I'm doing a series of articles for the Saturday Tatler, and I called to see Mrs. Bear for the first of all," began the newcomer in the insinuating tone of his tribe. With his quick eyes were taking, while his quick eyes, we're going to call him reporter for now and put him at the bottom till he has a name. While his quick eyes were taking in all they could, experience having taught him to make the most of his time, as his visits were usually short ones. "Mrs. Bear never sees reporters, sir. But a few moments will be all I ask," said the man, edging his way further in. "You can't see her, for she's out," replied Teddy, as a backwards glance showed him that his unhappy parent had vanished. Through the window, he supposed, as she sometimes did when hard bestead. "Very sorry, I'll call again. Is it her study? Charming room." And the intruder fell back on the parlor, bound to see something and bag of fact if he died in the attempt. "It is not," said Teddy, gently but firmly backing him down the hall, devoutly hoping that his mother had escaped round to the corner of the house. "If you could tell me Mrs. Bear's age and birthplace, date of marriage and number of children, I should be much obliged," continued the unabashed visitor as he tripped over the doormat. "She's about 60, born in Nova Zembla, married just 40 years ago today, and has 11 daughters. Anything else, sir?" And Ted's sober face was such a funny contrast to his ridiculous reply that the reporter owned himself routed, and retired, laughing just as a lady followed by 3 beaming girls came up the steps. "We're all the way from Oshkosh and couldn't go home without seeing dear Aunt Joe. My girls just admire her works, and lot on getting a sight of her. I know it's early, but we're going to see Holmes and Longfellow and the rest of the celebrities, so we ran out here first thing. Mrs. Erastus Kingsbury Parmalee of Oshkosh tell her. We don't mind waitin'. We can look round a spell if she ain't ready to see folks yet." All this was uttered with such rapidity that Ted could only stand gazing at the buxom damsels, who fixed their 6 blue eyes upon him so beseechingly that his native gallantry made it impossible to deny them a civil reply at least. Buxom? "Mrs. Bear is not visible today. Out just now, I believe. But you can see the house and grounds if you like," he murmured, falling back as the 4 pressed in, gazing rapturously about them. "Oh, thank you. Sweet, pretty place, I'm sure. That's where she writes, ain't it? Do tell me if that's her picture. Looks just as I imagined her." I don't know why she's got a weird southernish accent, but hey. We're gonna call her intruding mother. Doop, doop, doop. I think there's too much to go for me to finish this today, so we're going to save that. I'm going to go to chapter 3 and save that. Alright, save that, and then what I'm going to do, because I keep pages documents for all of this, I'm going to go into, let me close out of it here, delete that, and we're going to open up today's thing. We're going to find Just As I Imagined. Doop. And then we're going to delete that all the way up. Because I think there's still probably another 15-20 minutes to go, and I got to do work. Oh, man. Close. It didn't select. It, like, unselected at the very top. Anyway, so we'll do a part 2 for this one. I'll rename it here shortly. Yeah, there's still about 15 minutes to go. And that's a little bit too long for work. Anyways, thanks, guys!